Hi there, my name is Brian Harrison. I'm a cloud solution architect with Microsoft, and this is the Azure 101 series. In this particular video, I'm going to be focusing on Cloud Shell, with this being Cloud Shell 101. Now, in my Portal 101, I actually talked about where you can get access to Cloud Shell, which is right up here in the top bar. By clicking on this, it will open up a new window. Now, this window is still within the Azure portal, allowing you to gather information about resources from the Azure subscription that you are logged into. As you can see, I still have this up at the top of my browser. So if I do need to get information, say for example from this virtual network, I can get information from it and then use it inside of the Cloud Shell. Now, what exactly is Cloud Shell? First of all, Cloud Shell is a container that is spun up inside of your Azure subscription, and it is spun up to provide you access to command line tools that you can then use to interact with your Azure subscription or set of subscriptions. By default, you get access to a bash shell, or for those of you who maybe are not aware of bash shell is the command line interface for most Linux environments. But you also have the ability to switch over to a PowerShell interface as well if you all are more familiar with the PowerShell language. And the great thing about both of these is that you automatically are logged into your Azure subscription, which means that you can use both PowerShell or the Azure CLI directly against your subscription. So for example, with the Azure CLI, which I'll do a separate video on just how to use the CLI, but the standard command language for Azure CLI is AZ for Azure, and then you start going through the resource types. So let's just do something simple for AZ group, and then I have the ability to list all of these that I have created. Now you'll see my listing of resource groups actually right here, of which there are 8. So there should be 8 that I return back here, of which we can see each one of the individual names. For example, there is AccuWeathers, there is Children's Place, and you can see what location they're in, what provisioning state they're in, any tags that were associated, as well as the reference ID for each one of them. Now, this is the JSON documentation, and it is the default output for the Azure CLI. But if I wanted to, say, list these in a table format, then what I could do is output table, and I'm going to get the exact same list but the default table format. So, and you'll notice that I did not do any login at all in order to get access to this information. That is the power of Cloud Shell. It allows you to automatically interact with your subscription without having to go through the authentication process. It is basing all of your authentication off of your authentication into the portal. Now, in addition to having access to the Azure CLI and PowerShell, you also have access to some other command line tools within the scope of the container. And these are command line tools that are going to potentially be used in concert with your Azure subscription. So for example, the 2 most prevalent ones that I know of using and that other customers that I know have used are Terraform, which is another open source based capability of deploying resources into Azure using a scripting language. The other is Git. Now, the Git tools, command line tools in particular, are actually available inside the container. So I can do a Git clone, and you can see that I'm getting error messages back stating that I didn't give it enough information. Now, what I would actually want to do is, let's say I've got some ARM templates, and I'll do a separate 101 on the ARM templating language and how you can leverage it to deploy resources inside of Azure. But let's say I already have some that I've created, and I actually do. I have them sitting in my GitHub repository. Well, I want to deploy them into my Azure subscription, but I don't want to do them across the internet and bring them across from GitHub. I actually want to bring them down local to my Azure subscription and actually run it right directly within my region. It'll make the processing of the templates a lot faster, especially if the template files are large. So I do have a large number of templates available to me. What I can do is clone the entire repo and bring it down. Well, you might be asking yourself, yes, but Brian, well then where are these templates going to get stored when you do that cloning? Fantastic question. Yes, this is a container, but the container does not give you any storage capability for storing all files. What the Cloud Shell does is it provides the container with direct integration with an Azure storage account. So if I go back up here really quickly into my portal, and I go and take a look at all of my storage accounts, you will see that I have a storage account here which has a name, no special name to it, and it's because it was a name that was given by Azure, but you can see that the resource group is Cloud Shell Storage West US. That's because every Cloud Shell for every user in every subscription, if you're going to leverage Cloud Shell, the very first time you try, it will require you to create a new storage account that is used just specifically for Cloud Shell. Now, you do have the ability to move some things around and leverage an existing storage account, but the preference, and certainly my recommendation, is create a new one. That means that anytime you create new script files directly from within Cloud Shell, or you clone them down from, say, a Git repository, those files will get put into this storage account. And I'll prove that to you here in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git clone, and I'm going to use a URL from one of my Git repositories where I have some ARM templates currently loaded. And hit enter. Now, this is going to clone the entire repo. If I do an ls, I now have not only the cloud drive, which is a folder location for where I can store all files into my storage account, but I now also have the global P repository. So if I go over to that one and do an ls, you'll see I've got my README files. I can then go into the templates folder, and there are all of the JSON files that I created, which now allows me to do something like the following. And I can actually create a new deployment, leverage the Azure deploy.json file, which, by the way, is linked to many others, and actually process a brand new deployment into a brand new resource group if I choose to, directly here from within Cloud Shell, saving me a tremendous amount of time and effort of moving files around, those kinds of things. Now, in order to prove to you that those files now exist in my storage account, what I can do, go into my storage account here, go down to my blobs area, the files area. There is the file area, Cloud Shell, Cloud Console, and I actually have the ability to now go into here and take a look at all of the folders that have been created, including the ones that are already listed in here. So this is all stored inside of this storage account. Which means that every time I open up the Cloud Shell to leverage the storage account, I can actually use these scripts. Now, the great thing, of course, then about this is I can also bring in PowerShell scripts. I can bring in Bash shell scripts that already have Azure CLI commands or PowerShell commands that I need to run on a regular basis. I can actually do that very, very rapidly by storing these scripts directly within Cloud Shell and create a local repo that I can then push changes back up into a GitHub repository. So now that I've got this cloned repo, I can actually make changes and continually update my GitHub repository as well, allowing for other users to then make modifications too. This is just two of the types of capabilities that are available inside of Cloud Shell. In addition to Git and Terraform, you have SSH-based capabilities as you would normally think of if you were using a Linux environment. You have the standard text editors of Linux such as Vim, Nano, and Emacs. We already talked about Git. You also have some build tool capabilities such as Make and Maven. You also automatically have NPM if you're creating JavaScript-based scripts. You also have access to container-based tooling such as Docker, Kubernetes, DCOS, as well as the clients for SQL access, such as the MySQL client, the PostgreSQL client, as well as MySQL or SQL Server's client. You also can get access to Cloud Foundry CLI and Ansible, as well as even Python. So these are just some of the things that you can leverage. There are also development languages that are supported. I already mentioned JavaScript, for example, with Node.js. I've already talked about PowerShell, Python, Java, Go, even .NET Core. Those are all available as supported languages that can be leveraged inside of here as well. But the big thing that I want to point out is that for all of us IT guys, it is a great way for you to start working with scripting and doing scripting directly within the scope of your Azure subscription, and you'll have access to your Azure subscription information should you not remember the name of something or a parameter of something. You can go and look at it inside the portal and then leverage it in your scripts very, very quickly. So hopefully this gives you a great understanding of Cloud Shell. In the next couple of videos, I'll give you a one-on-one on both the Azure CLI as well as the Azure PowerShell modules. So I hope to see you then.